You're listening to KZOM, Oleander Public Radio.
Welcome to Innsmouth, stranger.
Hi, I'm Rob Whiten from the Innsmouth Book Club. Join me and my fellow guide John Chadwick as we take you on a fortnightly tour of Innsmouth. We visit places such as the Picture House, the Library and Innsmouth Museum to discuss all aspects of weird fiction, whether it be book, film, music, TV or art. As well as that, we stop over at the Gilman House to have a chat with a resident guest. That includes authors, artists, musicians, in fact Lovecraftian creatives of all types. You can find our free shows on Patreon, and there you can also sign up as a patron, which brings you bonus content, plus a monthly PDF copy of Innsmouth News, which features articles, author spotlights, all the latest news and reviews, and more. You can find us at patreon.com/InnsmouthBC. We hope to see you soon, because remember, Innsmouth isn't just a place, it's a state of mind.
Use MRP 5KM D6 to get 10%. Welcome to the world of Conquest. Immerse yourself in the epic battles and strategic warfare with our two thrilling tabletop miniature games. Conquest, The Last Argument of Kings, a rank-and-file wargame, and Conquest, First Blood, a skirmish game. What makes these games even more exciting is that you can use the same miniatures to play both. Conquest, First Blood, our gripping skirmish game. With First Blood, you can experience the intense, fast-paced battles on a smaller scale while still utilizing the same meticulously crafted miniatures from your collection. So whether you're a seasoned war strategist or a newcomer eager to embark on your first conquest, the world of Conquest offers you endless possibilities. Gather your forces, hone your tactics, and prepare yourself for the ultimate test of skill and strategy across both The Last Argument of Kings and First Blood. The battlefield awaits. Go to pgttcm.com or the show notes to find out more. Get 10% off all orders by entering code MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. Get 10% off all books, miniatures, and more. Or go to PGTTCM or the show notes to find out more.
Episode of Geeky Crossroads. I am your host, David Heath, aka Farmer Dave. And now you're thinking, why am I not on the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos? Why are you listening to this? And what is said Geeky Crossroads? Or not. I'm pre-recording this, and honestly, I don't know what you're thinking, but work with me on this bit, okay? So, the answer to the first question is yes, I am still a co-host on the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, and we still will be doing episodes, but instead of a 3-part show, we're going to be doing a 2-part show. One part where I, DB, and Gretchen will discuss a concept or a trope from the Cthulhu mythos, and part 2 we'll be discussing a horror movie that one of the three of us chose. So we're basically breaking off the middle part, and we're doing this, making its own show, and we're doing this for several reasons. One is logistics, 2 is to sort of give people maybe smaller episodes that they can digest easier, but this also gives me where we're definitely going to be talking about things cosmic horror-y, and wow, that sounded terrible, as well as, Lovecraftian horror. We're going to be talking a lot more on other subjects in this particular show. So the concept of Geeky Crossroads is this is where a lot of geeky things or nerdy things or genre things are going to be come together and discussed, and hopefully, definitely me, but hopefully we'll have maybe some guests on where we'll talk about more than just supernatural literature, more than just the pulps, but including that. Things like science fiction, paranormal stories, urban legends, spy genre, just sort of a combination of things. And who will decide what we talk about? Well, me, duh, it's my show. But no, we're also going to reach out to you, the fans, and what do you want to discuss, and maybe by itself or in combination with things. Scooby-Doo is this sort of brilliant combination of horror and mystery and teen angst. So there's more than one genre can come together as something. And those who know me, and does anyone really know the true Farmer Dave? But I digress. But those who know me, one of the things that I really like is Cyberpunk. Now, I see myself as being, Cyberpunk in the early 90s. I kind of see myself as, OG Cyberpunk. But the truth is, I was a late adapter for the time. I read, Neuromancer, basically the Bible of Cyberpunk, 7 years after it was published. And at the time, I was seen as, showing up late for the party. But now, it's been literally over 3 decades. I kind of look back as one of the original fans. I know that DB and I have discussed this in other shows, but I wrote a paper at UCLA my senior year for an English class, and he wrote a paper in high school almost on the exact subject. And my thesis on this paper was that the future was going to be counterculture, and that computers were going to be, and that there would be a counterculture of nerds that would equivalent to the hippies of the 60s, and they would be the driving force behind technology and computers in the last part of the 20th and the early 21st century. And just as the hippies had at least sort of their dogma and ideas based on Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land and the Lord of the Rings, that this new counterculture was going to, at its root, be based on the early cyberpunk books. What I didn't get back then, and DB also, so at least 2 of us missed it, computers were not going to be counterculture. They were going to be culture. That they were going to be so embedded into our daily lives that they would become commonplace. They would be almost as necessary as, say, a car in Southern California was in the 90s. And that would be almost hard to function in this new culture without it. And as such, these counterculture elements that were found in the Cyberpunk book were lost on society. Not lost, but they didn't become a driving force as the realities of the modern technological world took hold and they became, I don't want to say passé. So what I want to talk about today is the origin and definition of the word cyberpunk. And the first definition is also the origin of the word, and that is a short story by Bruce Bethke. Bethke wrote the short story Cyberpunk it was published in 1983. Probably wrote it the year before, and it was first published in Amazing Stories. It basically tells the story of Mikey, who is, they don't use the word, but he's basically a hacker. And he is basically, his parents don't get him. And he falls into the influence of basically this cult-like leader, and he sort of has this sort of gang of young techies, hackers, and sort of almost a cult-like group of about four I believe. And the story is basically his rebellion against his parents and his parents' attempt to control him, which is, the age-old story of the teenage rebel versus the parental figures. Now, Bethke said that he came up with the term cyberpunk by writing down all these sort of computer-related words, cyber, techno, data, things like that, on one list of yellow post-it notes, and then all these sort of criminal words, punk, thug, goon, on another list, and just kept combining it till he found the one he liked, which is cyberpunk. Now, one thing that Bethke will later say is that the worst move he ever made in his life was not to copyright the word. So the word cyberpunk is public domain. It is not a copyrighted word and can be used by anyone. That's going to be one of the reasons why it becomes a popular word or term. Anybody can use it in their fiction. Now, there are always legal disclaimers, and I'm not a lawyer. There are certain fonts of the word. There are certain things such as role-playing games that are limited, but the term cyberpunk is a free-range word. It's not copyrighted. Now, I said that I was sort of slow, early 90s, getting into cyberpunk, but I was pretty heavy in it, enough that I was writing, college papers on the subject, and I did not get to read the short story Cyberpunk until 2018. And the reason why is it's going to be kind of hard to find. Now, until recently, I have not had a print copy. And Bethke is going to be, I don't want to say this in a bad word, but he's going to be a little vague about what happened. And part of this, I think, is his hands are tied behind his back for legal reasons. Now, Bethke, and we're going to talk more about the early cyberpunk writers, but it's always going to be, in the 90s and 2000s when I was researching this, it's always the short story. The word comes from the short story by Bruce Bethke, then kind of drops it. Bethke, although he is going to write Head Crash, which is a pretty important cyberpunk book in the 90s, he's kind of disappear from the original writers, which would be called cyberpunks. It's always going to be, he coined the term in his short story. But nobody I knew had read it. We all knew about it, but we had not read it in the 90s. And the reason, there is a reason why. So what I'm going to talk about next, I pieced together from Bethke's website an interview in Strange Horizons by Lynn Jamnick from 2005, and an interview he did on the Storypunks podcast in 2018. So there was a lot of hype to make this short story into a book. And so he continued it into a book, and as far as I know, I've only seen Beth Key's version of this story, and I take it for his word. I have no reason to doubt this, but I haven't heard the other side. And he basically sold the rights for the print copy of Cyberpunk as an extended novel. And he had a very definite plan on how it was going to end. And in this story, remember, Mikey is high school age, and he was wanted the story to end in the school. And his publisher, and to best of my knowledge, who this publisher is, has never been acknowledged. And that may very well be due to, legal reasons, which, okay, I get. Wanted the story to end, or wanted the story to have a sort of Boris Viejo cover where Mikey has like an Uzi and a cheerleader is grabbing onto his chest, sort of anticlimactic combat at the end. Now, remember, Bethke wants this story to end in a high school, and even though from what I gather this is pre-Columbine, but still, he did not want his story to end in a shootout in the school. And because of this, the publisher tanked the story. This is why I, a cyberpunk enthusiast, cannot read the story until about 2018. Again, we all heard of the story. It was the holy grail of cyberpunk stories. But no one I knew personally had read it, because you had to pretty much get a copy of the original Amazing Stories, and no one really had that. Now, I read it online in 2018, and as near as I can tell, the reason why this is that the publisher bought the print rights to the story, not the electronic media rights, and as such, Bethke publishes it for free, and if you pay $5, you can read the novel. Now, recently that has changed, and if you're into cyberpunk literature, the great big book of Cyberpunk is this amazing 1,200-page, super small type. It's just amazing cyberpunk story, and it's in there. So this is the first time I've encountered it in physical print, and that just came out last year. And interesting enough, it's not the lead story of Cyberpunk. It's in there, it's in the beginning of sort of the society section, but that's something else. So, the first definition of Cyberpunk is the Bethke short story and later his novel. And if you have not read it, it's worth reading. And now, one of the things that people basically who grew up in the 21st century are going to complain about it and cyberpunk in general is that it's old hat. Well, that's because all these cyberpunk concepts have come into our basic science fiction. At the time, it was groundbreaking. It was instrumental. It was game-changing. And now these incredibly brand new concepts are tropes. So yes, I get that if you grew up after the computer revolution, then yes, it might be, you've seen this, done that type situation. But at the time, it was instrumental. And I think it's important to read for that reason, if not other. The one thing, too, I think Bethke got in ways that other cyberpunk writers didn't. And we're going to talk about Gibson, but almost all their characters are adult. Bethke got how there would be a generational divide because of technology. And again, this was much more when I was growing, or young adult in the 80s and the 90s than now. But this new technology, the computer, is going to create a balance, or it's going to mess up the balance, where all of a sudden children, youth, high school students had an advantage over their parents. And the best example I can give is growing up in Southern California, that children of immigrants who spoke English and their parents didn't, the children had this huge societal advantage. And I'm not saying any of my friends who were in this situation did, but there was always this concern they would use it as a bargaining chip or as a ploy against their parents. We see that Mikey would be completely at his parents' whim, except he controls technology that they do not. And I think that is maybe that is the brilliance of Cyberpunk, the short story, compared to all the other Cyberpunk stories, is that no one else got that. The protagonists in almost all the other major Cyberpunk stories that are going to come out at that time are... Okay, so definition 2 of Cyberpunk. And that is going to be a group of writers who in the 80s basically focused on this new wave noir style writing of technological short stories and to some novels too. And this comes from Gardner-Dozois. Gardner was at the time the editor in Isaac Asimov magazine. And he would write a lot of editorials, and he was talking about this new wave of science fiction writers. Rudy Ruckner, John Walter Williams, John Shirley, Bruce Sterling, and of course, William Gibson. And he came up with the term cyberpunk to describe this new generation of science fiction writers who wrote dark, dystopian, near-future, high-tech stories. And it began to be called the writers' cyberpunks. Once Dozois started calling these writers cyberpunks, then that leads right into definition 3, which is the main sort of definition now of cyberpunk, is this style of writing, near fiction, dystopia, corporations own everything, focusing on an individual character. You absolutely have supporting characters, but in sort of this noir hero style, you have one character struggling against the odds in a dark future where computers are nearly magic. Now, is this going to exist before Cyberpunk? Before what is considered the main book of Cyberpunk, Neuromancer. And we're going to see that in of things like True Names. But this is when it becomes a genre. It becomes a thing unto itself. And as Bethke's book or short story, Cyberpunk, it's where the term comes from. The source for the genre, or the UR example, or the fountainhead for which all waters flow, is going to be William Gibson's Neuromancer. Now, Neuromancer is going to come out about the same time, within I think a year, of the release of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Now, I'll probably do something on Blade Runner. Yes, I love that movie, except for that scene where Deckard forces himself on Rachel. Blade Runner was not a success financially. And yes, it is considered by many a cyberpunk movie, but it's not really. There's no real computers. The technology, it's more noir than it is high tech, more cyber. Other than the androids, the most cybernetic thing is the Voight Comp machine in that little kind of computer picture thing that Decker keeps yelling, enhance on. But it caught the feeling that Cyberpunk was trying to spread. The dark futures, corporations as political, powerful entities, that the individual against this society, they have no control. So it is spiritually very much a cyberpunk movie. In technology, it is much less a cyberpunk movie than, say, the earlier pre-cyberpunk movie Tron. And we'll talk a little bit about this in gaming, but when I first started playing Shadowrun, and I was trying to explain what a Decker does in cyberspace, we didn't know what the word cyberspace, it wasn't a commonly used word. I had to explain it like, well, you go into the Tron universe, because that was the only reference we had. And again, Tron, which I think is a very cyberpunk movie, predates the term, the word, and the movement cyberpunk. The book that sort of cast the word cyberpunk in cement with the genre is going to be Bruce Sterling's short story collection, Mirror Shades, the Cyberpunk Anthology, which is a great collection. And I think I read it 91, 92, and it was forever on, the shelves of the local bookstores, and it was sort of it was an introduction to a lot of people who were sci-fi fans into cyberpunk, and the term, this is cyberpunk. And bluntly, I noticed it, but kind of kept it to myself. Half the stories in that are not cyberpunk. Absolutely, there are some. There's some great ones. A John Shirley story. There's some Gibson stories. But even Mirror Shades, which comes from, Mozart Mirror Shades, which is a Gibson and Sterling story, it's a dimensional traveling story. It's not cyberpunk. Rudy Ruckner, who is one of the founders of cyberpunk, his story is about Houdini escaping from nuclear bombs. Not cyberpunk at all. And I kind of thought I was the only one who noticed this, but Rewired, the post-cyberpunk anthology book, partly edited by John Kessel. Kessel shares letters with Bruce Sterling, and Sterling admits that even back then, he was trying to subvert and to not derail, but this concept of cyberpunk. And that he openly admits that at least half of his stories in what is the definitive cyberpunk anthology isn't cyberpunk. So there's always going to be this question of what is cyberpunk. And I think Sterling was trying to say that. Interesting story kind of to punk is that the first steampunk story, a difference engine, was written by Gibson and Sterling. So they basically created two forms of punk fiction. But even then, he was deconstructing and subverting the concept of what cyberpunk is. And now, as technology becomes more general, computers are less magic, but we do see some, honest to goodness, corporate horror stories. We get in a long debate. When did cyberpunk end? When did post-cyberpunk start? What is cyberpunk? What is post-cyberpunk? And bluntly, that's for another podcast. So definition 3 is the writing style that started in the 80s of dark, dystopian, near-future, high-tech, low-life noir stories. Definition 4 is going to be a tabletop role-playing game created by Mike Pondsmith. And I think, again, surprisingly, one of the best sources on this, and it's only a little bit, it's going to be Bruce Sterling. I mean, absolutely what Pondsmith wrote about how he created it, I think is very important. But Bruce Sterling in the Hacker Crackdown, which is, it's a dated book, I admit, but it's a picture in time of hacker culture and the way that the early 80s looked at hackers and computers in general. And it's a fascinating look. I read it then, I reread it, and it's definitely this interesting sort of snapshot in time of hacker culture. But he has a chapter about how the U.S. Secret Service raided Steve Jackson's game because they thought GURPS Cyberpunk was basically going to be a manual on how to commit credit fraud. Yeah, it's a real thing. Look it up. And by the way, up until 9/11, the Secret Service was part of the Treasury Department, and this presidential thing was just sort of a small gig. That's a whole long story. Maybe I'll tell another story. But they were in charge of credit fraud. That's why it's the Secret Service, not the FBI, that's raiding Steve Jackson's. Yada yada. But so back to that chapter in the Hacker Crackdown, Sterling compares the three main 90s role-playing tabletop games of Cyberpunk, GURPS, and Shadowrun. He leaves out Cyberspace, which, okay, even I didn't play that one. In which he basically describes Cyberpunk as being this number crunchy rule game and heavy on the rules, and it absolutely was and is. And even in this new sort of golden era of role-playing games where rules like story-driven stories, Cyberpunk Red is still kind of crunchy, but no means as crunchy as, say, the 2020, Cyberpunk 2020, which is basically the second edition. And a lot of the tropes that we now see in Cyberpunk and post-Cyberpunk are going to be codified in this game. In fact, people who are introduced first to modern Cyberpunk and then this game see it kind of a generic Cyberpunk setting, but that's because a lot of these tropes and settings and corporations and ideas were developed and played with and perfected in this game, and it was going to work its way back into science fiction and culture. So number 5 definition is a criminal who commits computer crimes. And I first came across this, and I was watching, I wasn't even paying attention. I walked in the room, and it was either Jeopardy or Win Ben Stein's Money. And basically the question was that this is a science fiction term used for a computer criminal. And I scratched my head, I couldn't figure out, and the answer was cyberpunk. And I guess they cited some dictionary at the time. And so that is a cyberpunk definition, but it's one that has lost meaning, or it's no longer a very common use term, as things like hacker and cracker and dark hats and white hats and black hats have all kind of took its place. But that as a term for people who commit computer crimes is about as close a definition as my concept of that senior paper as reality got. And sort of the final definition is going to be CD Projekt Red's video game. And surprising, a lot of people, this is kind of, especially outside science fiction, and this is their introduction to the word cyberpunk. And obviously the term's been there literally 41 years since Bethke's story was published. And it kind of, here's the irony, is this concept of computers and high tech and doing what you want in a society that attempts to control you in the name of capitalism. It's a computer game that is making all this money that comes from Eastern Europe is where the introduction to the word cyberpunk comes to many people. And again, you guys know I can't play video games. I make the person walk in the wall. I had a really hard difficulty getting out of the bathroom in Arasaka in the Cyberpunk game. And I got to a point where I couldn't get past the first mission without getting shot. But it does, again, the Cyberpunk video game is nothing new. And that is beautiful. Because it takes all these old 4-decade ideas and concepts of loyalty among thieves, or is there, where there is no loyalty to the superiors and the higher-ups. This independence, this Raymond Chandler-esque hero in a world designed to control him. And it presents it in a way that, if not new, is new to a new generation. And that is part of the beauty of the game. And in the story is not new. If the plot is not new, the medium is new. Now, there absolutely have been cyberpunk games since the 80s, but they haven't had this amount of success and popularity that the 2077 game has had. So that is where the word cyberpunk comes from, as well as some of the definitions. And we're going to be exploring some more things as the show goes on, including I definitely want to talk about Robert Chambers and Ambrose Bierce and the King of Yellow, as well as things like my experiences growing up with the Dungeons and Dragons Saturday morning cartoon in a time where Saturday morning cartoons do not exist. So I hope that you enjoy this. I hope that you continue to listen to Geeky Crossroads, as well as the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. And I am Farmer Dave, and I will be seeing
show
you
notes
next time.
or go to pgttcm.com for more information. And also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all the other places where podcast stuff exists. All right, back to the show.
In Legacy Door, a lurker from space casts a shadow over time.
We opened our eyes upon the human world. We found ourselves lying on an especially yielding bed in a room displaying scattered relics of their shallow past, tied together by more recently produced items meant to blend with the relics. Typical.
A sensitive journalist dreams of unknown lives.
Seems like every time I close my eyes, they get stronger. I can't even say the last time I had a normal sleep, let alone a dreamless one.
An outspoken lawyer defends the suspect in an unspeakable crime.
And that client was Jonathan Strauss, held for the murder of his daughter Abigail and her companion Harrison Reese.
And a stalwart investigator tries to drag it all into the light.
Some of the Reeses and the Strausses have been involved with something that seems to include an obsession with bloodlines and longevity for at least decades.
Legacy Door is a weekly cosmic horror mystery podcast. An ensemble of actors tell a story, also available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. Available now.
Any Cuba Cobra S combo. Compared to the mainstream 3D printer on the market, Anycubic S1 is faster. The speed has improved 12 times. The Benchy can be completed in 15 minutes. That's 600 millimeters a second. fully enclosed construction using the Cobra OS system and cooling system minimizes vibrations and enhances the responsiveness to improve the quality of printing. Anycubic Cobra S features a full metal hot end capable of reaching a peak temperature of 320 degrees. Quiet mode is as low as 44 decibels while printing. 44 decibels, that's as loud as the library, or bird calls, or a forced air furnace. Equipped with built-in camera to view the printing process. Finally, use my link to save $120. Get the combo and be able to print in 4 to 8 colors. Fast and easy to use. If you have a hobby or a business, you'll find hundreds of uses for your Anycubic printer. Use the show notes to find out anything you want. Get anything you want from Anycubic. Thank you, and back to the show.
Hey everybody, it's me, Farmer Dave, and as I think I've said already in this show, DB is a little bit under the weather, and it's, the holidays, so a lot of things are going on, so basically, I have no adult supervision. That can be either very good or very bad, depending on where your point of view is coming from. So basically what it does mean is I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. So there. Nah, just kidding. So, people know me, if I have a love of literature, which I do, but two forms I really do like, and if I love anything as much as I love cosmic horror, it's going to be Cyberpunk. In fact, I've got some things I want to talk about Cyberpunk on future shows, but I want to talk a little bit about Cyberpunk TV that came out in this last year. Talk about 4 shows and what admittedly is not Cyberpunk, but I think influenced by Cyberpunk. And one of them actually came out in November of last year, but I'm finally getting around to watching it. So since I've already basically stated this entire show is about me, it falls within the parameters of this show. So the first recent Cyberpunk TV show I'm going to talk about is Blade Runner Black Lotus. And there's a lot of Blade Runner semi-canon out there. Of course, everyone probably knows this. Blade Runner was based on a Philip K. Dick story called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And even though, Philip K. Dick died as they started working on it, he did work in some with Ridley Scott. But it's a completely different story. It has a lot of the same tropes, and I want to correct myself, it's a different story, but it has a lot of the tropes. And where Blade Runner is very much about the 80s, Do Androids Dream of the Electric Sheep, even though they're both set in the near future of their times, is clearly about the 50s and the 60s, and the experiences that Philip K. Dick had, and the same way that Blade Runner is the first movie that Ridley Scott works on after his older brother Frank died. Frank was not in Hollywood. He was a merchant marine who had died. It was much older than Ridley and had died of skin cancer, and so a lot of Ridley Scott's raw emotions went into this movie, Blade Runner, as well as a lot of Philip K. Dick's questions and wanting to understand the nature of reality and his life and insanity. And he was diagnosed schizophrenic, and drug use go into, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So there's a lot of comic books. I remember there's even like a kind of a Choose Your Own Adventure book out in the 80s. A couple of follow-up semi-canon novels that kind of try to bridge between the book and the movie, Replicant Night. But one of the newest ones is Black Lotus, and it came out for Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and last year being 2021, November, and I think it's a good, I think it's a good follow-up to the Blade Runner movies. It is loyal to the canon, but doesn't hold it sacrosanct. It's not too loyal, if that makes any sense. It's willing to go on its own ways. It's also very influenced by 60s, 70s, and later grindhouse revenge movies. And it's basically a revenge story. Now, I'm going to try to keep things as spoiler-free as possible, but if you haven't seen it, there will be some spoilers. And it definitely, I think, takes this revenge... Well, it does. It takes this revenge idea that was so, revenge exploitation movies of the 20th century, and it takes them. This is it with a character named L, and L is, spoilers, a replicant, even though they don't reveal it until like 4th episode. It's pretty obvious. Who was programmed not to kill and was sent out to be hunted by human beings, but during this hunt her combat instincts kicked in, and now she's going on this Quentin Tarantino style quest for revenge throughout noir LA of the people that basically hunted her and her fellow replicant. Now, when William Gibson wrote the first official Cyberpunk book, Neuromancer, he was deeply influenced by noir. And you've seen it in his writings. But even more than Gibson, I think, about the same time, Scott's Blade Runner, is obviously neo-noir. It is tech-noir. It is future noir, whatever you want to call it. It's basically a noir story. A washed-up cop is forced back into one last job and meets a femme fatale. That's the core of noir. And this has very much that noir feeling, as well as this revenge plot. In fact, it is so noirish that the Blade Runner in it is named Marlowe, like Philip Marlowe from Dashiell Hammett novels. It embraces its noir origins, but not to the point where it holds it as a sacred cow. It's willing to sort of play with it and realize that, the whole nature of noir is things are not perfect. The future is not perfect. And it also dwells very much on, the Mike Hammer, Philip Marlowe, L.A. at the time. So it takes this post-war L.A. and gives it a basically alternative future version, but it keeps the things that were in those original LA-based noir stories. The corruption, the ambiguity, and takes in this question, what is real, that was in so much of Philip K. Dick's work. So honestly, it's a great series. I would suggest anyone who wants to watch it. One thing I got to bring up is the Uncanny Valley. So it's that weird sort of 3D art that we see in computer games. And the more I watch it, every time I watch the episodes at first, I'm in that Uncanny Valley. I'm shaken. And about 5 or 6 minutes into the show, it disappears, and I become immersed in the world. And I thought at first this was a coincidence, but I think it was kind of an idea that they did do this on purpose because of the nature of the show. Reality, science fiction, artificial intelligence. So even though in many cases I'm not a fan of this 3D video game art, it works in this case. The other I want to talk about is Edge Runners. And Edge Runners could basically be written off as like a 10-30-minute ads for the Cyberpunk 2077 video game. But it is not. It is so much more because of everything. Honestly, Trigger, the studio that did it, just hit it out of the park. The story, the loyalty to Mike Pondsmith's original plans in the original role-playing game, the color, the characters, the fact that it does not swerve away from this crapsack world that's out there, that there are individual moments of happiness. And in fact, and again, not spoilers, I would say that this is darker than Gibson's work. In Gibson's work, you could at least earn your own happy ending. The world is against you. It is so set against you. It's just, you got to live in the moment, because there are no long-term happy endings for anybody. And at its core, good cyberpunk is about characters, and these characters are just deep and amazing. Even characters like Rebecca, who just seems to be this sort of gun-happy Lolita at beginning, you see in the end just how deep these characters are. And they do so well for just so few episodes. There's kind of like a bonus episode that honestly I didn't know about until about a week ago, and I don't know why I missed it. But it is basically a prequel that was released, and again, it's basically an ad for the series, but it's so well done, and it's an independent story. And that is Sasha's story. It's a 4 or so minute video that you can watch on YouTube. It is a music video set to the Edgerunner closing song, which is Let You Down. It has been suggested that if you like the story but don't particularly like the song or the music, you can just basically watch it with the sound turned off. And you can, because there's no real dialogue except for the dialogue over like cell phones that you can read. And it's just a really great 4-minute show that is sort of a prequel. It introduces Maine's crew, or at least part of Maine's crew. I kind of think that this is sort of for those who follow the series, that Sasha was the net runner before Kiwi and Lucy. And again, it captures this crapsack world of cyberpunk, but the triumphs of the human heart. And I think it's just a great 4-minute show that can be watched either for free, either independently or in any time with the watching the Ed Runners. In fact, I watched it literally months after I'd seen the original series, even though it's a prequel. So it's really good, and I would recommend the whole thing to anybody who is interested in cyberpunk in general. So you can't talk about William Gibson without, and TV, without talking about The Peripheral, which is just a great show written, by the inventor of cyberpunk, William Gibson, on Amazon Prime. And it stars Chloe Grace Moretz, who will forever be the 13-year-old assassin in Kick-Ass to me, but just amazing. I just did not realize how amazingly talented she is. She makes this believable character that you're completely invested in, who has charm and faults, and just, like I said, I think she's great. And the chemistry she has with Jack Raynor, who plays her brother, is just amazing. And, Chloe's character does have romantic interest, but the fact that her key relationship is her brother, and just the love and protection, and the fact that they try to protect each other maybe more than they should be maybe open to each other, just an incredible dynamic, well written. I think it's amazing. So if you're not familiar with this, and I haven't read the book, I was aware of the book, but I hadn't read it. It's basically this girl is hired to test this virtual reality. And in doing so, it may not be virtual reality. She may be actually traveling to a different dimension. And the intrigue and espionage that comes out of this, it's an amazing story, based on the writings of, like I said, the grandfather of, or godfather of Cyberpunk. And it's also kind of familiar or tangentially related to one of my favorite, least known Gibson works, which is Archangel, which is about another dimension basically reaching out and trying to change things after World War II so that this other reality becomes like theirs but doesn't make the same mistake. And it's just it's a great show. It's a great cast. There's a lot of action, but there's a lot of slow burn. So you've got to be, and it's not a bad thing, but you've got to be willing to invest in the story and the characters in between sort of the opening and closing combat scenes. But, I like it. I really, really do like it and cannot recommend it enough. And finally, to wrap this up, I want to talk about a show that is not cyberpunk, but very cyberpunk influenced tangentially, and that is Money Heist, the one set in Korea, the new one, the one they just released the episodes. And it's beginning to get out of the shadows of the Spanish Money Heist. It will never be as good, in my opinion, as the Spanish Money Heist, but almost nothing is. And these characters are kind of diverging from the Spanish versions, but in a lot of ways it's very cyberpunkish. The lights, the fact that it takes place not only in Korea, because it's this very sort of, obvious Asian appearance, but it takes place in a near future, fictional, so there's not like, robotic arms or things, but where peace between North and South Korea have basically on its way, it's achieving. And so the DMZ is made into this new future city, but complete with all the problems that large cities have. And people from the North and the South go there as kind of like this Korean Casablanca, and they begin to, live their lives and are caught up in this hope for a new life, a better life, which isn't always the reality. And it's, the company, which is made up in this case, not like a corporation, but made up between North and South Korean politicians, is very cyberpunk. And where the Spanish, which again I love, the Spanish Money Heist, they were basically criminals who became heroes, who became, revolutionaries. They were kind of forced in that, but even the professor who planned everything, who does have this maybe skewed but very sense of justice, started out as a criminal. And here, yes, they're criminals, but there's more of a sense of fighting the system, an acknowledged system that have done them wrong. And so a lot of the feelings, the Asian influences, especially like their version of Tokyo at the beginning, her backstory is very cyberpunk. This whole idea of this new Korea being corrupted by a corporation, even though it's a governmental corporation, is very cyberpunk. And so, if you're going to watch something, by all means, watch the Spanish episode. That's probably the best, in my opinion. But if you want some sort of cyberpunk fix, the Korean the Korean version of Money Heist. Not bad. Okay, so I'm going to kind of end it here, and hopefully soon we'll be able to have DB back. And if you are listening to this during the holidays, by all means, happy holidays, whichever holidays you celebrate or don't celebrate in your case. And we'll be seeing you soon.